Hello, Stephanie.
Hello, Sarah.
Hello, everybody. For the benefit of those of you listening on the podcast, we're recording today live into our community. So we're joined by some of our community members today who may be chipping in with questions and thoughts as well. This episode idea actually came off of the previous live episode we recorded in our community, where somebody asked this question during the episode, and we thought this is a great topic for a whole episode of its own. And I don't know why I do a build up to the subject, because everybody knows what it is when you've seen the title. But we're going to talk about self-care versus self-indulgence. I really like this topic idea, and I have a lot of thoughts.
Why do you like this topic idea? What about this speaks to you?
Yeah, this for me often is the crux of anything that we're doing. For me, self-care is so foundational to doing anything. For me, if the self-care aspect goes out the window, making any changes, trying to think differently, behave differently, do any of the other things, it all falls apart. Because for me, self-care feels like basic, foundational stuff that the other stuff, recovery stuff, needs to come on top of, the more specific stuff, even though recovery itself can be part of the whole self-care thing as well. We'll probably get into what they actually mean, but instinctually, self-care, self-indulgence, what does it conjure for you?
Well, the reason that I'm interested in this topic, I'm excited to be talking about it, but not because of the investment in the concepts necessarily, but because I have a lot of opinions about the fact that we make these two things different, to talk about what they both feel like. I mean, I think the mainstream idea of it is that self-care are things you do to take care of yourself, really, kind of simply put. And we can go into the nuances of what that means. But self-indulgence has a connotation of being, I think it almost goes along with gluttony kind of ideas. I don't like the connotation of self-indulgence.
Do you know, this stuff brings up boundaries for me. So first of all, I think of self-care as meeting your needs in the most simplest way. And I know that doesn't sound particularly fun always, but meeting your needs, identifying and meeting needs feels like self-care. Self-indulgence feels more like self-care, trying to do something for yourself, but without the boundaries. And so I think there's a positive self-indulgence. I really want to take the morality out of it. And I think that's the bit that's sticking with you, is that sometimes it can feel a bit of this moral thing, this idea of indulgence.
Well, I think it's mostly spoken of that way.
Well, I think this might just speak to our different experiences.
Yeah.
Because it's a little bit like when Stef Dosanjh came on the podcast and I was talking about money at the end, and she took it to, oh, it was because I didn't think I deserved to spend money on myself. I'm like, no, that does not resonate with me in the slightest. So if we take travel, for example, because as you know, I'm a big fan of an upgrade. I like to travel comfortably. And I think of that very much as a self-indulgence. It's not something I need, but I get so much joy out of it. And I appreciate it so much. Like just traveling in the next cabin. I love it. And there's a little part of me that's like, oh, you're spending that money, but the joy I get from it. So I would say self-care, there's going to be an overlap. Of course, there's going to be an overlap. I don't need an upgrade when I travel. So that for me is the indulgent part. Where self-indulgence for me is problematic, or indulgence in and of itself, where it made me think of boundaries, is it made me think of raising kids, right? If you indulge your kids' every desire and whim, you give in to them. I think of that sometimes with this idea of indulging, almost like spoiling to the detriment of the person being indulged, whether that's ourselves or the other person. We end up doing them a disservice.
Yes. The examples are helpful to reconceptualize this. I can understand the way, and I agree with you. I'm like, okay, I can see it that way, especially with the airplane. Yeah, all of that makes sense. I suppose that I'm thinking about the way that sometimes indulgence can be interchangeable, I think, with the word impulsivity, like as if we're doing something. Like when we talk about indulgence, it's typically, I mean, I think about it with food, like I'm going to indulge in that. I'm going to indulge in a piece of cake, or I'm going to indulge in an extra portion of XYZ, right? And indulgence is typically used with, and I think in the definition, which might as well pull it up.
You might as well. Have you got it there?
Oh, I do. It's just sitting here. The definition of indulge is to allow oneself to enjoy the pleasure of. But then another one is to allow oneself to enjoy a particular pleasure, especially that of alcohol. And I actually was surprised I didn't say food, because I think indulgence is more commonly associated with food, like these guilty pleasures kind of thing. And that to me feels like like it is being moralized, or it is being, there's something about that connotation that feels sticky to me. And I've now lost my complete train of thought. See, I'm trying to keep these sentences going and I can't, it's not helpful.
I noticed earlier when you didn't finish a sentence, I was like, oh, I can't
I
throw
did
her
too.
off by saying.
And then I was going to say, oh, see, I didn't finish my sentence. But then I would have interrupted a new sentence. And see, now I'm confused.
I think you need to just go with it and sort it out in the edit.
Okay, I'll just be me. For the benefit of the listeners, I preemptively said that I was going to try to complete sentences in this podcast episode, and it's difficult. But when we're speaking about food and indulgence, that I just have this like, I bristle at that, because it feels like you're saying that you shouldn't have this thing, that the indulgence is something you technically maybe shouldn't be doing for yourself. And it does moralize it in that regard. I do see the difference in what you're saying, where you're talking about something you don't necessarily need, but that it feels good to you. And I suppose that this idea of offering oneself pleasure doesn't feel right to me as an indulgence. I feel like it's okay to have pleasure for pleasure's sake, because I'm not someone who resonates at all with this idea that I shouldn't have pleasure. Like I don't feel selfish when I offer myself things. I have no qualms about doing things for myself and offering myself these things, because I think it's an important part of life is to experience pleasure, rather than it being this thing that you maybe should dabble in sometimes, like, but with moderation. That to me is how indulgence sounds like. It, that's what it feels like to me.
If we then hop across to self-care, I've got the definition for self-care. I think there's probably going to be lots of various ones. I'm going to go with the one from Oxford Languages Online Dictionary, which says self-care is the practice of taking action to preserve or improve one's own health. Interesting. The practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness, in particular during periods of stress. That's interesting, because I think that's often the time when self-care gets spoken about the most. If you're going through something difficult, it's like, are you taking care of yourself? What about self-care? It's almost like when life is just easy or easier, we're going through quieter periods in life, that somehow then we don't need self-care.
Just be strong enough.
It just gets deprioritized. It's almost like waiting till there's a fire before.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. I was going to say waiting till there's a fire before you put it out, but you
that actually makes sense.
That was not.
I knew what you were meant, though.
You know what I mean.
Yeah. Right? I think there is a metaphor that you're looking for.
There is. And if anyone in the community who's listening now can help me find it, that would be much appreciated. Doesn't say anything about needs in the way that I thought of it. I think, is it Brie Campos, who might have been the person I heard talking about it as self-parenting. So self-care isn't always about doing the things that might sometimes come under self-indulgence, or treating like pedicures oneself.
This is the idea of, I think, what self-care.
Yes. It can be the boring stuff as well, like getting yourself to bed earlier and all of things like that. Does that tie in with what you think of with self-care?
Yes, I think self-care to me has a spectrum that probably self-indulgence is meant to cover as well, right? So part of the spectrum are the boring things, the things that, yes, going to bed early, or sometimes even just getting dressed in the morning for some of us, right? Like these can be acts of or not, or, wearing the comfy clothes can be acts of self-care. We don't tend to think of it. I think the magazine, or do people read magazines, by the way, anymore?
I can't remember the last time I bought a magazine.
Well, maybe online magazines, but it's, the self-care is presented, I think, as the bubble baths, when in fact, I think it could be, yes, more boring than that, but it's a spectrum. And I think, to me, I think about self-care as encompassing all that. I think we need we need all of that. Like we need those basic non-fancy things, but we also need, and I say need from a mental health perspective, to be offering ourselves joyous things simply for the sake of pleasure. Not necessarily because we need it from a physical standpoint, but just because I think we all need more pleasure. I think have scarcity of it, just generally because of the pace of life and the way
then
the
it
expectations.
Is a need. Then it is
yes,
a need.
I say it as a need, not a physical one, but more of a mental health need. I would clump a lot more things that I think most people would call, or many people would call, indulgences in self-care, just on a different part of the spectrum of it. And the point I was trying to make earlier was that I think also this idea of, I'm going to indulge in this thing impulsively. I think the difference between indulgence and impulsivity, especially when it comes to food, sometimes people say like, oh, well, I'm just gonna have the thing. I'm just gonna indulge in this. And I think sometimes it's like, are you choosing that thing, or are you being impulsive with that thing and calling it an indulgence and then feeling guilty about it? But to choose to have something that's not coming from a place of like, I'm just having it because I want it, but saying, I'm having it because I want it. You know what I mean? This is a big difference.
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking of a scenario now where I might spend an afternoon curled up on the sofa with my electric blanket, watching something on TV. I think sometimes that comes from an act of self-care, because what I need to feel comforted, I need to just be able to watch something, be entertained, and to just have that moment of rest, and it feels rejuvenating. It really is like feeding a need, something I need. There are other times where I would think about it more like an indulgence, just because there's a show I really want to watch, or I just want the enjoyment of doing that. Don't quite need it. It's not the same pull as the first one, but it's like a positive self-indulgence. And then there's another one. And again, I kind of want to use the word indulgence again. And this is where they're like this idea of impulsivity or something like that. It's the whole where it feels like that wasn't what I needed. And I actually feel worse for doing it. It felt like I didn't really attend to what I might have needed in that moment.
Mm.
Maybe I was too tired, whatever it might be. And there's no personal judgment around that, as in, I'm not doing anything wrong. But those, I guess, are these kind of three scenarios that I'm trying to tease out and see where I think about where I'd put them on like a self-care versus indulgence. Because indulgence sometimes feels like sometimes lying in is self-care. Sometimes it's indulgence and it's wonderful. And sometimes it's like an indulgence and it's not. It's not what I needed.
Yes.
And I feel worse for it because it's made my mood drop lower or something.
That third one, I don't think about as indulgence. I don't think that choice would have come from indulgence. I think it would have come from potentially escape. Like there's something about it that doesn't feel like it was a choice in the first place, or just like I'm choosing to escape from something.
Are there any times you'd use the word indulgence where it would be like a negative outcome, not a moral thing?
No, I think it would be an impulsive. If that were to happen, that negative outcome, it would be because I made a choice impulsively, or because I was avoiding something. Like when I think about how I used to stay in bed all the time, and I would skip classes to stay in bed, or I would skip work to stay in bed, and I would have. I guess somebody might call that like indulge yourself in sleep, or just indulge yourself in the cozy comfort of your bed. But it was not. It was an avoidance, or it was. I don't think that's not a word that I don't resonate with the word indulgence in this regard. I don't know that there's any scenario in which I would, because inherently when I indulge in something, I choose it. I don't even like the word. I don't even know that I relate to it, except that you said the thing about the plane ticket, and then I'm like, oh, that's one. I don't know how to put that in my definitions schema. Like I don't know how to, like that is one. That is one where I don't need it, but I would really enjoy it, and I don't even need it for my mental health. It would be nice for my mental health, but I don't need it for it.
Yes,
that is an area, but I can't think of a negative outcome. One of those that would just be a choice. Unless I ran out of money. That was like, darn it, I shouldn't have bought that ticket.
Sometimes with chasing pleasure, how you can get in almost like a dopamine loop with that. So you're kind of chasing pleasure, you're getting this diminishing return. It can happen with food, right? It could happen with food where, you're not binging, you're not compulsively eating. And the food is just delicious. And you have some just because it's delicious. You're not hungry, you're just enjoying the pleasure of having it. And then there's this pull to kind of have more. Again, it doesn't quite feel like a choice. It's not this sort of full-on compulsion, but then I don't know, like hitting a point where it feels like, oh, that really didn't serve me. Now I don't feel good, and I'm just gonna have to like wait till.
All right. Yeah. Again, it borders for me on impulsivity instead. That comes from the dopamine. The chasing of the dopamine can make us quite impulsive. What? Alcohol can be like that, actually. A couple drinks in, right? And you're like, I'll have another. It feels so good. It just feels like the right thing to do. And then you're like, oh, it wasn't. But I don't know that, again, that's still impulsivity.
Is it though? Because sometimes, and I think, there's still a pretty big drinking culture in the UK where my friends, and me included at times, will go out already knowing that we're going to quote unquote indulge, it's not coming from an impulsive place. Like we know before we go out that chances are
Oh,
we're
really?
going to sink
You
X number
plan
of
it.
drinks.
Yeah.
It's not like we're going out going, oh, we're just going to have 2 drinks
Okay.
and then we will stop. It makes me sound like a right lush, but
No, I hear you. I hear you. Okay, I can modify my opinion.
are we getting?
You're proving this to me very well. I feel like your conceptualization of these topics is broader than mine potentially, and my brain is reworking itself to understand what impulsivity might really mean.
We might be getting a bit tied up in semantics, so
Yeah.
I want to pull it into recovery.
Yes.
What most of our listeners, if you've made it this far, might actually be interested in these topics in terms of, I mean, probably food choice is where it's going to come up the most, because body image maybe not, well, yeah, I guess certainly the self-care stuff to some degree, but I think even the word indulgent is often used as a marketing word with certain foods.
I know. I don't like that.
It's that whole, again, there'll be some people for whom their whole core beliefs and stuff is about not deserving things and not deserving.
Yes.
It's quite a restrictive mentality, isn't it? It's kind of like, I don't deserve this, I don't deserve that. Where the more permitter one is, I deserve a treat. And I hear that language in my dad a lot. Like, he always deserves a treat for something or other. And part of me, sometimes I feel like there might be a flash of irritation about it. Because I'm like, if you just want the thing, then have the thing. Stop saying that you need to
Don't consider it an indulgence.
Like that.
Yeah, right. That's the issue I've got.
But food can be like a treat as well.
Yeah, I know.
There's the deserving.
That's what I'm advocating for. I think the reason this topic came up in the first place, at least the way that I interpreted it, was that there's something wrong with indulging. We feel guilty for doing that, or that we don't deserve doing that, or that we're doing it and then feeling guilty about that. And I suppose that I want to rework that to be like, no, it's okay to have that food for pleasure's sake and not chalk it up to an indulgence in the way that presents itself as a reward, or that I had to earn it. You know what I mean? Which is typically, I think, associated with indulgence. Like, can we just have things for pleasure's sake as a form of self-care, or just 'cause? Like, does it have to be the moral version of indulgence? Don't you think that's where the question came from?
Quite possibly. What it brings up for me is, back when, if someone had said that to me, like, okay, I'm allowed to indulge, what I think, or certainly what I would believe would happen, and probably would have happened at least some of the time, would be I would indulge, but then I would keep feeling like I keep indulging to the point of pain. It was like I felt like I didn't have any edges or boundaries, because with the very permitter part, it's like, well, if you're saying to me like, oh, we'll just indulge whenever you want to indulge, and I needed to learn how to put a boundary and how to say no. Whereas, of course, getting through the restriction part, learning how to say yes. And the word soothing is coming to mind as well, which isn't quite the same as indulgence, but it feels like there's like a little crossover here. To indulge and to soothe would have been a big part of it. And then if I'm trying to keep reaching for food to keep that soothing feeling going, I'm then in this sort of cycle of overeating.
Yeah.
Or eating in a way that certainly isn't feeling good to me over a longer period of time, because otherwise it's suggesting that, oh, you can just indulge, you'll have the thing, you're allowed the thing, it doesn't even have to be called an indulgence, and then because you did that, you felt satisfied and you could stop.
Yeah, I think this is presenting to me a core difference between people who might grow up, and I think growing up is part of the reason why we conceptualize things differently, how we grow up. But when I think about indulgence, I do think about it in terms of like that it's some kind of thing that you shouldn't do. Whereas the way you just presented it is like almost nurturing. Like, you're just giving yourself a little pleasure. Like, you're giving yourself a little reward. And that is just something that I think that we're going to, again, it's going to be like permitters and restrictors. Potentially even, I know those are food concepts, but I wonder if it extends into just like general life conceptualization of doing things for yourself to reward yourself, to like give yourself something, and that's not felt as a bad thing. Mm-hmm. But in restrictive mentality, food related or not, it is. It's like, that's not taking care of yourself. That sort of idea. So the words themselves and the concepts might be different depending on the listener.
And this is why I really want to pull the self-care piece into indulgence itself, because to eat without any boundaries, to just eat whenever you want something, whenever you fancy it, to have it, to eat without boundaries might be exactly what someone needs. Like depending
Right.
on where they're at, what they're coming out of, what's going on for them around food. And for somebody else, that may not be what they need. And this, I think, is where I wouldn't want to completely separate indulgence from need.
Yes.
Because if I ignore my needs and dive into this more like, let's say, sort of a hedonistic indulgence whilst pushing my needs aside, because I think part of it as well would be I'd start eating, being like, well, I'm supposed to allow myself, and I'd have something, and then I'd want a bit more, and then I'd feel a bit uncomfortable what I'd eaten, so I didn't want to stop and sit with the discomfort of what I'd eaten, so then I just eat more.
Yeah. So self-care in my mind is part of self-indulgence. Like I couldn't have self-indulgence without self-care. Like they have to be together. They work together. I don't think about self-indulgence without it. And as such, I have no guilt about indulging, so to speak, in things. Because I really see it as I have to do that. Like I not I have to, but it's helpful. Like this is part of how I take care of myself. And or if an indulgence isn't, or, something that would take care of me, then that's when I would choose not to do it if it wouldn't take care of me, which would mean an inherent boundary. That is part of the self-care part of it.
So here's the thing, and this is one of the criticisms of therapy sometimes, which I think has legitimacy, is that self-care is quite an individualistic concept. It's about looking after your own needs. What is it I need, putting in my boundaries and all of that kind of thing. And obviously we live in a collective society, and I'm really particularly interested in your thoughts on this as a mother, because there are times that what you need is going to clash with what your kids need and what your family needs. And there's sometimes this negotiation, especially when you are someone who is responsible to some degree, or quite a large degree, for other people's needs, i.e. your children. Just wondering how you think about that.
That's hard. That's a common conflict for me, because a lot of times my needs are in conflict with theirs. And I choose, I think, more than most mothers to tend to my needs, not instead, but definitely in addition to, or before sometimes, in order to put, oxygen mask kind of idea. I do that. And I do that because I know that I won't be much use if I'm resentful or if I'm not taken care of. Like that shows up for me very, very, like, I don't store that well. Like I'm not one of those people who's like sucks it up and swallows it. It will come out. And so that's not helpful for anyone. So I will take my needs into account as far as how can I provide them with their needs. I have to provide myself with mine. And I know that that's not typical. At least it doesn't seem to be in motherhood, where it's like mostly putting the child's needs before your own. And a lot of the talk is about mothers taking care of themselves and learning to take care of themselves and being okay with indulging themselves or doing these self-care type things. This is not my issue. I don't have any, it's not that I don't have any problem with it, because I think I do still a little bit judge myself about it somehow. Like outside of my logic, I still have a little bit of judgment, but it's not an area that I feel like I need convincing, because I think, and this also is going to be a little bit debatable, but taking care of oneself, it's like that cliche. How do you take care? If you're not taking care of yourself, how do you take care of anyone else? Or how do you take care of but there's also something to be made of like community care, which is a little different than self-care. And that, philosophy of like, we're so focused on taking care of ourselves and we're not really focused on the community, like both taking care of the community and the community taking care of us, like that more community model. But we just don't live, I don't think, in a community model, and that's why that's not as prevalent. Should it be, or like, would that be nice? Yes. And could we be leaning more into that? Yes. But ultimately, I think we do live in quite an individualistic society. And if we're not taking care of ourselves, I think that's showing up as burnout for sure, boundary issues, resentment, relationship dynamic problems. That's the term. Potentially binge eating, and restriction for that these symptoms will come up to say, but I have a client who came to me about 3 months ago and was like, I'm having binge restrict. It's, binge restrict. So of course, part of it is restrict, right? This is part of why the binging is happening, but it's clear that these symptoms are showing up because her life is so full of meeting needs for everyone else, top to bottom, dawn till dusk, and not taking care of herself. It's like one of the most textbook examples of that I've seen. And I don't do this with a lot of clients, but for her, it's like, okay, we're putting in like 3 breaks in your day and you're accountable about them to me. Like, this is how we've set it up. She's one of those people that really likes to be accountable. So, but in doing this, her binges have reduced, same with restriction and things like that. But I think binges will speak up. I think that binges will be like, hey, we have no room for ourselves. And even the binge itself can become that space. It's like, this is me time. I get by myself. I hide. Like, it's secrecy, shame, yes, but it's also like, and it's the byproduct of that is that you get to be by yourself for a limited amount of time and no one interrupts you. And this is yours. And I think that I see that frequently, where binges are that advocacy piece somewhere in your body saying, I'm not getting this and I need this. And I'm going to get it any way I can.
So for somebody then who's really struggling with that, because you said about looking after somebody else when you're not looking after your own needs. The problem is that it's possible, right? There are some things that we just can't do, but it is possible to look after other people and ignore your own needs with a cost. The things you listed there,
yeah,
maybe some other things that you haven't thought about. And I see and work with people who are quite stuck with that one because they think, yes, that's the cost. And it still feels like it's something I need to do because of their whole core beliefs or their condition or what they believe is right, as whether it's as a parent, carer, whatever it might be, that they're kind of stuck in that belief system too.
Yeah.
And also I think people are convinced that it's not possible. They'll say there's too much. They'll say, how do I do this if my life is quite full? Like, what are, I guess, tiny things that we could offer in a life that does feel very crowded with people making demands?
Yes. Well, this is where the basics of the self-care come in, because it doesn't have to be true. As a mother, I do know that, like, now maybe it's a little bit different, but when my kids were much younger, I couldn't take a lot of things. I just didn't have time. The kids were here always. Like, I didn't have separate time, except when Mike would come home from work and say, get outside. Go. That's when I started going outside. I talk about that in my relationship with exercise. That's why I started having a better relationship with exercise, because that's what it started to be about. Getting out of the house by myself, the only hour of the day that I could. So, I mean, that depended on my partner being able to, offer that to me and having him being home to do that, which I know, and speaking to many people, like, it isn't, these options aren't available. And I do think that there is certain privilege in certain, that different seasons of life have different privileges in that, and just resources that we have. Even being able to pay a babysitter, that is so costly now. And that this matter, this does have to do with the access. However, there are usually things we can be doing, like smaller things. And I think it's like finding those things. And back to your point, it was like, what are they? I've just circled back around to it. And I guess I'll try to offer that from the perspective of, like, when I was a mom of young kids and how that got out. And so sometimes it was asking, including my in-laws. My parents don't live nearby, but my in-laws do. And I asked my father-in-law to help with Elise when she was very young, because I needed it to get out of the house to do some things and actually to work. I was an OT at the time, and it was something he was happy, but a lot of people are afraid to ask for help. I wasn't. Like, I really need a few hours in the afternoon before Mike comes home from work where I can go work. Now, was I going out to get pedicures? No, I was going out to work, but that was self-care because I needed that I needed that outlet at that time in my life. I didn't want to just be a mom. So I went back to work and I worked part-time, but like, that was a part of taking care of myself so that I could be an OT also, for several hours a day. So sometimes it's like recruiting support. And I think that can be tricky, is asking. People feel like it's indulgent to ask for help. Mm-hmm. And instead to think about that as, and I suppose people think it's indulgent to have self-care. It really is, though. And to the degree that you have help available to use it, what are some other things? For me, I've talked about this. It was letting myself go lay in my bed which again, I had that guilt around, like, you can't do that as a mom. You can't just go lay in bed. I would bring them with me, and it was just simply just like a way to give myself permission to not do what maybe most moms were doing and like being in the kitchen, bebopping around. And I was like, I need 20 minutes and I'm going to put a show on for them and I'm going to lay down here and we're going to just like have downtime. And I wanted it in my bed. And I would, was it perfect? No. Would I prefer to have been by myself so I could have done that? Yes. But I did do it that way. And giving myself that permission was big for me. That was an act of self-care that I still stand by. And it's worked very well because I don't need it as much as I used to anymore. I think because I offer it. Those are my two that I can come up with right now.
Well, there's a theme that I keep hearing in what you're saying, and it's this giving myself permission. And you must see it as well. But so many people that I work with or talk with really, really struggle with that. And then they're saying things like, why am I not able to prioritize my health around food? Why am I not able to look after myself from like a body perspective and all of that? It's like how, you can change one thing and it can affect something else as well. It's like if you are still like really grappling with this whole looking after yourself in the day-to-day things that aren't even about food, if it's there, you're still struggling to be able to do that. Food's the hardest place to do that if it's the thing that you struggle with the most in your life.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think that like little changes in other areas of your life, which is about breaking patterns, can then have such a knock-on positive impact in how you might be relating with food and that kind of thing too. So that's why this, for me, just ties into everything. And so one of my things is it takes a lot for me to cancel plans. Because for me, once I'm committed, there's like a mental, like, right, that is happening. And tomorrow night, I had a friend booked to come around for dinner, and I haven't been very well this week. And I'm also running a training day on the Saturday. It's Thursday afternoon, and I haven't done anything for yet. And I thought to myself, I could really do with my friend not being around that Friday because I'm going to want an early night. I know I'm not going to finish all the stuff that I need to do for this presentation. And there's part of me going, yeah, but you could do that tonight. You could you could fit it in if you were a bit more organized over the next, anyway.
Yeah.
And I contacted her and I was like, can we reschedule? And I gave her 2 prime times, got Saturday night and another Friday night to choose from. And it was really weird because in that moment when it suddenly occurred to me, actually I could reschedule. For some people, this would be nothing because some people are much more comfortable, but I don't know why it's one of my things that I find harder to do. It's just, it feels like part of who I am. And I wonder as well for other people, for anyone listening, what are the things that just feel like that's just who you are? That's what you do. To the point where it feels like you then can't not do that in order to just go, actually, I think I need something different. I need to choose something different this time. And any practice I think that we have about breaking habitual patterns, whether it's me rescheduling, whatever it might be, I think really serves us just in life, in personal development, in trying to shift places where we have unhelpful patterns. And that's why I think it's helpful. I ran out of steam at the end of that.
Yeah. You just wrapped it up. But for somebody else also, it might be showing up to the plans where the pattern might be to cancel.
Yeah.
And that's starting to feel like, it's like, what's going to take care of you? And it's worth asking yourself the question, what's going to take care of me best when I'm not right inside that moment? Like, because right inside that moment, we have impulsivity or patterns coming up to be like, not cancel, it's like that's what's going to come up right then. But outside of that moment, to think about, I actually need to start showing up more, or I need to be putting in more boundaries on my time or less, like just depending. The exception to this would be food, I think, in terms of, if there's restriction happening, that sort of, because I can hear people like, yes, it's better for me not to eat the junk food, like that's what's really best outside of the moment, but that can also come from a different place. And just to remember what's coming from your biology versus what's coming from your choices. But also, how much is your lack of self-care impacting your life? Because it can get pretty bad. And I think in, working with this client that I've spoken of, it was at a point where it was undeniable. And I think life will do that. Sometimes things are like screaming at us to change. And we're like, no. And then finally it gets to a point sometimes where it's like, I see how much this is impacting me, and it's gotten to a place where I can't ignore it anymore. And then I think in that place, almost these changes are easier because then you're like, I really have to. It's almost becoming like dire for me not to be addressing some of these things. And I think sometimes we wait to get to a place like that. And maybe that's how we work, some of us. Support is helpful because it's really hard to do these things. And I don't think it's like you just make the decision to have boundaries with your time or to, and that then happens now. It's like we need a lot of reminding and reinforcing, including around, yes, it's okay for you to do that. It's okay for me to be giving myself permission to do this. We need to come back again and again and again to that. I don't think it's one of these, right, I'm going to just put these boundaries in, or I'm going to start taking care of myself now. That's going to be a process to untangle based on the things you mentioned, the habits that we form and the things that are just non-negotiable inside of us, that feel like non-negotiables inside of us. But part of changing that, I think, is identifying that like taking care of myself is important because sometimes that's not the belief. And then we just end up in the patterns.
Well, I think when it reaches the point where we have to, that's such a stressful place to have to implement self-care from. It's not fun. And I think self-care, especially when we're talking about it in terms of needs, it can feel like a job. It can feel like another thing we're supposed to be doing and we're not doing, and we're not taking good care of ourselves. So I guess, want to urge people to make it fun, because I think if we start from a place of we all inherently deserve to be able to take care of our needs, to have our needs met as much as possible. And of course, there are always going to be times when we can't. Can we make it fun? One other thought that I had about indulgence for me, I think one of the big differences is that we're having something we haven't earned. And that's okay because we don't have to earn stuff. But it's like we haven't earned it and we can have it. And I think when we're having something that we haven't earned or worked for or somehow like got to, like it, from the dopamine like lever as such, we haven't pressed on the pain thing to get the pleasure thing. For me, it just feels even more important to go into that with intentional enjoyment. Like not guilty. If I spend money on an upgrade and I spend the whole time feeling guilty, I had this indulgence and I didn't even get to enjoy it because I felt bad about it. And instead I want to feel that excitement and the fun part of it as well. And that, when I started thinking about it like that, it made me want to go and indulge somehow.
now you're compelled.
Now I'm like, indulging is so much fun. I want to indulge.
It is. And when you said like, okay, let's maybe pretend. What are 3 ways that you take, that you operate, that you offer yourself self-care on the regular? And then
it's funny you said this, because this morning I had a voice note from a friend who gave me some feedback, which was really nice. I was quite chuffed with it, but it surprised me. She said, I feel quite inspired by you because you're somebody who's really good at identifying your needs and knowing what it is that you need and then trying to meet that. And it took me by surprise. Sometimes you get a piece of feedback and you're like, what? Where did that come from?
Yes.
But then when I thought about it, I thought, yes, and part of it, I feel like I'm opening up a whole new book here, but part of it for me comes from I use the word a bit tongue-in-cheek, pathological independence. And no one else is going to come and meet my needs. These last few days where I hadn't been feeling well and I was tired and whatever, I was really low. The world got really dark this week. And this morning when my alarm went off, because I decided I was going to have a morning off of doing my YouTube video this morning because I hadn't been well. And usually my alarm goes off and I have something to get up for. I need to get up and do this. I need to get up and do that. And because I didn't, I reset my alarm and I was lying there kind of going to doze off again. And because the last few mornings have just felt really difficult to get out of bed from a mood and tiredness perspective. And I remembered it's not something I've had to use for a while because it's been a long time since I've been consistently low. Something that really, really helped me in depressive, despairing times is getting out of bed 10 minutes earlier than I have to. There's something psychological about that for me, where it's like, I am choosing to start the day at this point. I'm not getting out of bed because I have to and I don't have a choice. And it gives me this feeling of autonomy, of taking a little bit of control at a time when perhaps life is feeling overwhelming. I'm doing this. And it's such a small thing. And I'm not saying it for moralizing, it's better to get up earlier, join the 5 a.m. club. But there was something about that little decision. And so this morning I was in the same moment and I got up that 10 minutes earlier. And I really think it made a difference to my
Yeah.
mood this morning. So that was just one that came up for me and struck me. Another one was a different friend. Again, today, I'd shared with her how when I was around my dad's the other day, he'd said to me, like, because you're really not yourself. I can see how low you are. And he got up, walked across the room to give me a hug, which was really slightly awkward, but really, really sweet. And my goodness, like I appreciated the sentiment. And I told my friend this, and she said, and because another friend of mine had also said, oh, you're not yourself. I told another friend this, and she said to me, I just think that's so lovely that you have people in your life that can just tell when you're low. Like they see that and they can tell that you're low. I was like, no, I was telling them. I was telling them how terrible I felt. I'm sitting there, my dad's like, oh, like I'm just the drama of like I'm sitting here like my head.
Let me
in my
hug her and
hands,
she'll shut
like,
up.
So I think another way from a self-care perspective is I am not afraid to tell people how I feel. And I think that because it communicates a need to other people as well. Because yes, of course I would love it if people could pick up on what's going on and just come and soothe me and give it to me. But there's nothing in me that believes that people will. I probably wouldn't pick it up for other people either. So that's another one. So that's two. And then I guess, the standard one that I'll just end with a basic one is things like my yoga, getting on the yoga mat. And actually another thing that I did last night, because I'd been feeling down all week, was I used to have a really consistent evening meditation practice, and it's just been really ad hoc. And last night I thought I really need to do that. And I did it, and I just felt such peace after that. And I was able to get a much better night's sleep after doing that too. So that was another act of self-care. And I've made a bit of a commitment to myself that I really am gonna and need to do that more often because of the benefits that I experience from it.
It's like you knew I was going to ask you that.
Anyone would think we'd planned an episode for a change.
We didn't. As an aside, my daughter, my 13-year-old, said to me the other day, Mom, I'm setting my alarm for 5 a.m. This is on a Saturday. And I was like, why? And she's like, because that's what people do. They get up at 5 a.m. with the sunrise or something like that. And then they do like da-da-da. And I was like, oh, geez. So I was like, you might be tired. And she was like, I know, but I want to do it. And I was like, okay. And I was like, she's probably not going to do it. But she did it. And she was like, Mom, she was so pleased with herself. She was like, I felt so good all day. She goes, I felt tired to go to bed. She had this benefit of it. And I think what happens is that we get corrupted eventually by this idea that we should do that. Because I think she learned it from she's not on social media, but like YouTube videos that, and these kids watch them. And I think that these become like the influences that at some point they're ideas, and then they become shoulds. She's not at a should, so it worked for her, and she was able to reap the benefits of it and feel like that was good for me, even though it's hard for her to get up early. It's just being mindful about watching, like, when does that turn into like, okay, I did that one time and now I shouldn't, that's, I think, what happens to us. I wanted to offer something that I'm working on taking care of myself for. It's like something I haven't mastered yet. That would be a self-care. And that is my knees. Oh, I got my MRIs back. And so I have 2 tears I have a tear in both knees. So I don't have to get surgery, but I have to get these kind of shots and things. But I've been like walking on it because I'm putting a different kind of one need over another. And I'm working on, I think it would serve me really well. And I have this brewing in the back of my mind, and I just haven't done it. And I want to do it, to actually go seek out a nearby pool. I think I need to be swimming and not walking. Like, I need to be taking better care of my knees. And it's hard for me because it would require that I have to readjust my schedule, or that I would have to, go out of my way to do something that's not in my routine. But in order for me to take better care of myself and not then end up resenting myself for having further torn my knee, I think that that's somewhere that I'd like to start focusing on, like making a choice that doesn't really feel appealing.
Do you think that once you get into a routine of swimming, though, that you will enjoy the swimming?
Yes, I do. It's just that hump you cross, I don't, there's a lot before that. And I'm like, ugh. So I keep battering my knees, so yeah, that's one of those examples of like less fancy self-care, I think. But for now, I'm just taking off altogether. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Got to get in a bathing suit, whole nother thing, right? But no, I am looking forward to seeing what happens.
Do you not have a bathing suit?
Of course I do, but
No.
putting on a bathing suit is like a
You
different.
said you had to get one. I thought you meant you had to
get in one.
Oh, get in one. Yeah.
Which is nice. Just like
it's good practice when you come to Bournemouth.
Yeah. We'll be swimming in the cold sea.
We swim in the cold sea. Yes, we will. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sally's just said someone encouraged her to aim for once a week as a starting point. You going to do that, or have you got an idea in your head that you're going to do X number of times a week?
no, I don't think about it like that. If I do that, forget it.
Yeah.
No, I just need to get there. My first goal is to get there. That's all. That's as far as I've gone.
Gotcha. All right. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you, Stefanie, for just being you.
It's like for what? Yeah, you too, Sarah. You too, and same to our community.
Okay. See you later, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.